Visor is a tool for achieving crystal clear alignment for teams. It is designed with really three pillars in mind, which are the most important things we think to any team is you need flexibility, you need the ability to trust that your information is accurate, and you need the ability to collaborate. And those three ingredients, if you kind of stew them in a pot together, those are effectively critical parts, at least from the tooling side, of achieving that team alignment.
So how much of that misalignment is attributed to like lack of a tool, right? Versus not receiving good clarity from up above.
Do you standardize such that reporting and rolling up and even communicating across team about status is easier? Or do you allow sort of like a federated system, in which case each team can operate the way they want?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Summer of Atlassian. Today I have Mike Yarrow from Visor. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. And first of all, before we even get started, thank you so much for being a supporter of the channel and just thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. We love the work that you do. It's so important to the community.
Thank you. I always I never know how to respond when people give me like a compliment on the channel. I guess it's my creative outlet. I would see it as like how I get stress off my shoulders.
That's
And for people to thank me for them being my therapist, I guess
if your stress relief is helping other people, you have found your purpose.
I found my purpose.
Truly.
But yeah, let's talk a little bit about Visor. I think you guys had been working with Becky for a while now. A fun little story. I don't know if Becky ever told you, but Becky reached out to me. I want to say maybe March of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, "Hey, Alex, how are you?" And I'm like, "Hi, I don't know who you are."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Our CEO would love to meet with you at Team 23. And the first thought that goes to my head is like, this is how people go to die. Like they just go like a total stranger meeting on the internet, want to like hang out with me at Team, and I'm like, oh, I don't even know.
What? So you hadn't like met random people at Team before who just like reached out cold?
Well, no, because last year's team was my first team. Team 23 was my first team, and I was like this influencer / content creator / not really. This was my first time that somebody's like, "Hey, let's meet up." And the only training I have is like, you don't meet strangers on the internet.
That's actually really funny. Does she know about this story?
I kind of told her a little bit because like I apologized later, right? Like after I found out Becky, one, she's a real person, and two, there's a real Michael.
Yeah.
And then I guess that maybe she didn't go to Team last year or something. I forgot what.
Yeah, I went last year as sort of like a scout party, just representing the company for the first time myself, also to see what it was like. We didn't have a booth. I just kind of came down and tried to participate as much as possible and meet as many folks in the community as I could, because it's one thing obviously to meet online and hang out on a video call, but it's just another thing to just be there in the moment. So I met a whole bunch of folks, and then coming back again this year for our second year, we had the booth. We had a couple team members, and it was just so fun seeing people that I had met last year too. It's a big party. I mean, really, the community, the event, everybody's just so happy to be there.
Yeah, no, it's definitely high energy.
Yeah.
I got a chance to walk from the Palazzo area to the bash party with Becky and some other
cool.
lady that was with her. And so we got like at least a 15-20 minute walk to bond.
That's fun.
It was just the three of us. We got lost, and so we were kind of just finding our way. They didn't really they were really good. I don't know. Did you go to the bash party?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So like walking over the bridge and like getting into the wind was easy, but then they kind of just stopped the sign.
Giving directions. Yeah. You had to find your way to the club.
Yeah, so at one point we were like just wandering in a circle. We're like, we've seen this tree before.
Well, that is the best way to bond with random strangers, is to get lost together and try to find your way somewhere.
But now that I know Becky wasn't actively trying to kill me or get me kidnapped.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, that party was incredible. I had no idea like who was gonna be like headlining it, and then all of a sudden we just see the signs and they're like, Afrojack, and I'm like, Afrojack, like whoa, like that was incredible, and just I don't know, it was
I always find the bash parties to be very interesting because maybe it's just I don't know if it's a cultural thing. Well, not like his like my background culture, but just like that my technical background culture. Like we're nerds, right? Like
yeah.
we're IT nerds, coding, doing very nerdy things. And the last thing that I think about is like Afrojack, like being part of it, or
Well,
even
we
dancing or partying or clubbing or any of that. Like I didn't do any of that like in college, right? Like the engineers were like, we went to school to work.
isn't it true though that like, the nerds, the geeks, the engineers, this is the time to shine. Like you invested all of that geekiness and nerdiness in something that's now helping, whether your company grow or whatever it is.
Yeah,
It's a badge of honor.
it is. But it reminds me. Have you ever seen Silicon Valley?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's too close. Sometimes I can't watch
Yeah.
it because it's too close to
Too
home.
close to heart, yeah, but it's like that opening scene from, like, episode 1 where, like, they're, like, at a Google party and Kid Rock is, like, headlining the whole thing, and everybody's just like there's, like, 3 people watching Kid Rock. Like, that's kinda how I feel, it's like, I don't know
Yeah.
if it's the right audience.
Yeah, yeah. It was fun.
Maybe watching, like, a live, like, Magic the Gathering game or something might tickle people's fancy a little bit more
Honestly,
than
I think you would also get a great audience if you did, like, a webinar on how to set up Jira automation.
I know,
You
right?
would have you would have people fired up in the audience in a similar way.
Yeah, well, the other thing I gotta remember, right, is like half the people that go to team are more like on the marketing side, more on like the people side, right? It's
Yeah,
a little less technical.
yeah,
You don't always just have the admins showing up and like yeah. So,
yeah, yeah, it's true.
but yeah, last year I don't know if you went to the bash party last year, but when they had it inside the expo hall, like I felt like that was my very first like exposure to. I'm like, why is there so much loud music? We just want to talk about Jira in here.
Can somebody turn the music down? I wanna talk about Jira.
Yeah, that's essentially the problem. At least
Yeah,
at the win, it was like out in the open, so it wasn't like
yeah,
echoing and chambering in there. So anyway, so yeah, that was my first encounter with Visor,
that's cool.
and my like I told my wife, I'm like, what do I do?
Do I meet this random stranger from the internet in Las Vegas and hope I come home?
Yeah, and hopefully I live to tell the story.
That's so funny.
But I'm glad I got to meet you guys all. At least
Yeah.
Becky, and I spent like 10, 15, 20 minutes with her, getting lost. So I'm very happy it worked out.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
So with that said, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Visor is, what it does, the product you guys have out here in the Atlassian ecosystem?
Yeah, 100%. Visor is a tool for achieving crystal clear alignment for teams. It is designed with really three pillars in mind, or which are the most important things we think to basically any team is you need flexibility, you need the ability to trust that your information is accurate, and you need the ability to collaborate. And those three ingredients, if you kind of stew them in a pot together, that those are effectively critical parts, at least from the tooling side, of achieving that team alignment. We see so many teams struggle with just getting everybody going in the same direction, and it can be hard to see it up front when it's happening. But if you don't get to your destination, or deadlines start missing, or there's tension on the team, that's usually a symptom of this sort of misalignment. As we were joking before the call, if you're Dr. Jira, I feel like Dr. Team Alignment. I have so many calls, hundreds of calls every year with teams that are struggling with getting everybody going in the same direction and reporting up to executives and reporting out to clients and stakeholders. And it's one of the hardest, mostly unsolved problems, I think, sort of in our ecosystem and in our
And how much
industry.
how much of that is misalignment even a word? I guess
I
it
think
is,
so,
right? Because
yeah.
your tires are misaligned, right? So how much of that
Yeah.
misalignment is attributed to like lack of a tool, right? Versus not receiving good clarity from up above, from
Mm.
like your leadership team.
I think most teams, if they were living in the same office together, and I even say living kind of intentionally there, like day and night, could probably get by without a tool, some type of software tool. But the reality is, We work sometimes in different time zones, different locations, and it becomes important to have some type of source of truth that's other than sort of the even like stories passed down like oral tradition. It's important to sometimes write that down, and that's where the tools come in. But all they can do is multiply and magnify the clarity that comes from above. So it does start with you have to have good direction from above, and then from there it has to sort of kind of propagate through the rest of the organization through some type of tool that sort of sets those goals and helps. But it's only as good as the direction that you start out with from people.
Yeah, and when I was looking at your guys' tool, I was very pleasantly surprised to find out that you guys did indeed support like initiatives or issue types above the epic.
Oh yeah.
I played with a couple of other like alignment tools, or road mapping is the word I would
Yeah.
like to use. Um, and yeah, just being restricted to like the epic and the story, like, well, that's very basic, and we can do
Yeah.
that in Jira. But you kind of help bring a whole bigger picture, a bigger perspective into the whole thing.
Hierarchy has been the, I think, probably the unsung hero of sort of like organizing work, if you think about it that way, whether it's true hierarchy or whether it's like grouping based on certain properties or initiatives. But being able to break things down into greater or less levels of detail are so important, because you need to start with what are we trying to achieve, or what is, like you said, the initiative at the initiative level, and then break that down into chunks that are deliverable as you kind of go down into the epics or stories. Or we actually invented a system that's unique to us, where we have our own entire set of issue types that kind of work a little bit better for the way our organization seems to work right now. Where we have projects are effectively our highest level, and that's just a unit of work. And as a software team, generally a unit of work is effectively one pull request. So it's kind of like a deliverable, and then we have the tasks and the criteria underneath it. And so the idea is, you have what are we trying to ship, and within that, sort of the idea of sort of like the epics and the story of like what are we trying to deliver, and then you break that down into parts that are easy to understand what to do, and then easy to understand when we've achieved it. And I think that has served us really well, because we kind of incorporate the when do we know we got there, at least from a technical deliverable standpoint, to the overarching goal of what we were trying to deliver in the first place.
And a couple more things that I want to touch on here. Like, first of all, one of my favorite things that I discovered while using your app was, and that you're kind of echoing with, like, you kind of almost customize the hierarchy a little bit, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
But the part that I liked a lot was, sometimes like me as a project manager or a product owner or something, right? Somebody who's setting that vision for the team and organizing the work. I'm not always a Jira admin,
Yep.
and these what I'll call auxiliary items, right? Just supplemental context supplementing items. Like, they're critical to kind of tell the cohesive story. And like you guys being able to add custom quote unquote fields
Fields. Yeah.
that are just to Visor, but not, you don't need all the Jira permissions
Yep.
in Jira. Like, that's super, that I thought that was super valuable, right? Because again, it gives every project manager the like little autonomy and freedom to
Yes.
kind of organize the way they need to and collect the information they need to, without also, you know, getting told no, you can't do it.
Well, that is exactly the same thing that Atlassian, I think, really discovered when they moved to, sort of what was, I think, then known as like the team managed rather than the company managed projects. This idea of providing autonomy to specific teams to work the way that they wanted to. That is, it's just effectively the same thing as, these SaaS applications generally exist and are sold to executives who want organization to be strictly organized such that it can be reportable. One of our other integrations is Salesforce, and Salesforce as a tool. I think in the sort of early days, really, it was more about how reportable your data was than how usable the product was, which is where they got a lot of complaints, and then eventually launched Salesforce Lightning as a way to kind of shift more focus to the workflow and the usability. But that sort of flexibility to work, it comes in tension with what the executives sometimes want. Like if I just want to add a field for an ad hoc purpose, that then messes up the data inside the instance, and that becomes a little bit of this weird tension, which is why
Yeah,
people go out to like spreadsheets and other products because they just need to get out
they
of those
they have more
constraints.
control.
Yeah,
It's all about that control, right? And but as a, I guess if I put my hat on of like being the owner of Atlassian, which I typically that's the hat I'm wearing, right?
yeah,
My goal is to kind of standardize, right?
that's right.
I'm about to drop a video that says that the title of my video is like, "This is the hardest job, or this is the hardest part about being a Jira admin." And spoilers for whoever's watching. I think by the time I drop this one, my video would have dropped. But the answer is saying no, like learning to say no, learning when, because it's not a matter of like, can I do this, can I do that, but like, should I do this, should I do that? Which again, this is the hard part of my job as a Jira admin, but
Mhm.
that's not always the right answer, right? When you're trying to tell a narrative, as a project manager usually is, you
Yep,
do need this supplemental thing, but it's hard to standardize. It's hard
yep.
to have everybody do it, which again, this is usually my ongoing struggle and fight with everybody.
It's a productive tension, but it is a tension. The biggest when patients come to us looking for help, trying to report up to executives or out to clients or stakeholders, the biggest problem we see and help them solve is that multiple pods or teams who need to generally report up to a same goal or a same stakeholder do things in a different way. And the ways in which they work are incompatible with some type of standard style of rolling up the reporting. And then you have this really hard dilemma of, to your point, do you standardize such that reporting and rolling up and even communicating across team about status is easier? Or do you allow sort of like a sort of federated system, in which case each team can operate the way they want, um, and that becomes a little bit of a problem. There's obviously some type of happy middle in there where there may be certain things that are common that you enforce, and then there are certain things that are up to the teams.
Yeah, so that's a really good one. Then the next one is my other favorite feature that I liked about you guys was like basically stakeholders, right? Oftentimes what the people that are the decision makers, the people, the spheres of influence, they're not in Jira all day. But they need to know what's going on at a high level, right? They need to have a good understanding of what's going on. But Jira is a pay to play model, right? And so now you have 60, 50, depending on the size of your team, right? Licenses that are just lost on someone's
Yeah.
going to log in once every quarter, once every 6 months
Yep.
just to get an update. And I really like the way you guys handle that ability to, have these stakeholders participate and be up to date.
Yeah, we think that providing viewable access to a variety of stakeholders is something that's so crucial. And if the alternative to granting somebody a license is exporting some type of static file, whether it's a CSV, a PDF, an image, um, that is just so suboptimal, because the moment that thing is exported, it's stale. Whereas if you grant that live viewer access, they could come in and see at any time. And so we don't charge for that. And that's an important sort of
Yeah,
part of
it's a
our
very
model.
a very important distinction, and I think something that lets you stand out in the marketplace, right? Because the only real alternative that folks have is to upgrade to the premium version, which
Mhm.
obviously unlocks like advanced roadmaps,
Yep,
but that comes with a hefty, hefty price,
that's true.
right? It's a very hefty price, and usually the part that most folks can't like, it's hard for them to digest is just the Atlassian model, which is you pay for everybody,
That's right.
not just the 3 or 4, 5 PMO or folks in your PMO, right? Like it's everybody, mothers, kids, siblings, the whole gang has to
Mhm.
come in and pay for a functionality that only a handful of people are going to use. Which
That's
I'm
true.
assuming this is why you made the call to host Visor outside of Jira as opposed to being inbred.
Well, fundamentally, that call came from the fact that the Atlassian ecosystem in Jira is actually just the first of many products we plan to integrate with. We really are building a stepping stone here, but this world in which we're operating of team alignment stretches to a variety of teams and tools. So it served that mission better to be a separate standalone app, but it happens to have this added benefit of, as not being a direct plugin. It means that you have, as a customer advisor, have far more control over the licensing and management of it. But I think it goes even deeper than that, where for these sort of tools that we use in our teams that are a little bit more team specific, And I think Jira and Atlassian are doing a great job of making their tool more broadly and widely accessible to a variety of teams, like marketing teams. But still, I think there's almost this territorialism inside companies around tools, and you have executives viewing certain narrow vertical or industry specific or team specific tools as the too narrow. And so having a layer on top for collaboration and sharing, and our table view is very intentional. We realized that if you present the data in a way that the stakeholders are already accustomed to receiving it, traditionally spreadsheets, and you make it buttery smooth and simple for them to get in, meaning you don't have some type of like arduous process for registering. It's basically you click a button and you come in and you see whatever you need to see. It just feels much better. It feels like the Switzerland of software. It's a safe place. Executives can come in, marketers can come in, and everybody can kind of have this shared perspective on what's going on without having to go inside somebody else's tool in a way.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. I think naturally for a lot of legacy Jira admins might not make sense, but it makes perfect amount of sense when again it's you only have a specific number of people that need to integrate anyways or talk, like,
Yeah.
and you still have a single source of truth, which I think is the beauty of it, right? Because you're
Yep.
not duplicating data in any way, shape, or form. You're syncing your records, and
Oh,
it just makes a lot of sense.
that's where stuff goes really awry. I have seen teams try to use even like visual tools like Microsoft Visio to represent plans. And the effort it takes to keep those things in sync and have two sources of truth and have people going and looking at the wrong. I've heard horror stories of teams going to an outdated, let's say,
Mm.
Visio plan to get, what the date was, and then just completely missing the mark because they were referring to something that was,
Outdated, yeah.
out of date. And it's just, then you get people are just so upset by that, and it creates tension. And that's why the integrations are so important to us. But giving all that flexibility, I mean, that's what our goal is to be the most flexible place that matches the way the team works, rather than forcing the team to adapt to the way that the tool works.
Yeah. And I do want to ask you a hard question here, and let's see how hard it is,
Sure.
right? But so so fundamentally, I don't know how many of my videos you see, right? But I wouldn't say I'm like an agile purist because I'm not by any stretch of the
Yeah.
imagination. But I do firmly believe that one of the reasons why Jira, the platform, the tool, is as successful as it is today is because it empowers teams to really shine with their agile implementations, right? But when we look at something like Visor, it's a lot more waterfally, right? Like project plans and all that stuff that yells like waterfall a lot more than Agile does because Agile just cares about the now and it's such a
Yeah.
small. I don't like it, right? It's not scalable. It's not you can't run a business off Agile, in my opinion,
Mm,
right? You can
yeah.
run a little team, but the moment you got to get two teams working with each other, the whole Agile model kind of cripples and falls flat on its face, right? But what are your thoughts on this, right? Like with respect to by using this team alignment, right? You kind of almost don't rely on Agile that much, and it's a little bit more waterfally. Like, is your plan or your goals to basically be like a Jira influenced Microsoft project type of thing, or where were you guys trying to go with
We
this?
view ourselves more at that sort of collaboration and presentation layer, more so a little bit than the planning layer, if that makes sense. And so our goal is to adapt to whether you're using Scrum, or whether you're using Waterfall, or whether you're using Scrumfall or Scrumban, or any type of portmanteau.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've heard so many
Water
different
Scrum.
cool ones.
I have seen it all. I I've been seeing a lot of interesting content lately about whether the position of Scrum Master is like declining in popularity. I think Agile has a very important set of principles. I think that it works, and Agile and Scrum are not necessarily the same thing. The idea of breaking work up
Right, yeah,
into
I think there's a bigger bucket within there's a bunch of smaller practices inside.
practices. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So I think the idea of agile in principle makes tremendous sense, but in practice, and I think probably agile purists would find a way to say that the framework does indeed have this, but you really need to have ideas around timeframes and like a longer term goal. It's not just about iterating without like
Yeah.
a longer direction. And that's where I think the industry today is sort of like counterbalancing or rebalancing back to, okay, we need to take the best parts of both of these sort of frameworks or ways of working. What becomes really hard is when teams, their workflow requires them to work in waterfall, and yet they try their hardest to be a scrum shop, or use
Right,
sprints
right.
to deliver. That's not what the idea ever was. It wasn't like, let's break this big waterfall project down into 2 week chunks of deliverables. I think scrum was really
That's my
about,
favorite implementation of Scrum, is where somebody takes like a 6-month project and is like, we're just gonna chop it up into 2-week increments and go, we're agile.
no, it's not. The whole idea of Scrum was, as far as I understand it, to be adapting to what you learn and finding your way if you don't exactly know where you're going. It was a way to deal with uncertainty by sort of making finite bets, and and learning and planning. Plan, do, check, act. The sort of like the nice cycle of continuous improvement. It all sort of fits together in that world. But when you're taking a big project down and delivering it over time, and who's not, right? I mean, most companies have an idea of where they're going, and I think that's where the tension comes into play, even between these two concepts. And I think we as an industry are sort of adapting to that right now.
Yeah. No, I think you put it together so beautifully, right? Because that was one of the things that I learned the hard way, which was I joined a team that was like, we're Scrum to the max. And I'm like, cool, awesome, you're innovative. But at the same time, I had like an executive saying, like, how much is this costing us? When is this gonna get done? I was like, I don't know, sometime
Yeah.
eventually. It's hard to tell with Scrum because you embrace the uncertainty,
Yep.
right? And I don't know who in the right mind or who out there was like, if you guys go Scrum, it's gonna be faster. Because a lot of people do coin agile with agility. Like, you gotta go faster, but I'm like, not necessarily. You go faster for a small period of time, but in the long run, it probably takes longer, but you just got there better.
Yeah, some members of my team are always driving us towards using sprints. In fact, as a joke, some of my team members made a shirt that says "Ask me about sprints." And for our team at least, I think every team has to make the decision, and there's no one right answer for every team. But for us, we are working on some things that are just, as I'd like to say, they're so innovative and they're so unpredictable on how long they're going to take, that trying to fit them into a specific time frame of sprints, or even breaking them up, can be disadvantageous to letting the engineers, who are not just, they're innovators, they're craftspeople, they're trying things. I mean, I write code myself. When I go into it and I write code, I can't think about a deadline or an end of a sprint.
Right. Yeah.
I want it to take as long as it takes to get it right. And obviously we need to move quickly through it, but some work just doesn't lend itself to having hard off times, or even trying to estimate. I think the act of estimating, we all try to do this, and it's so important. You need to, I mean, even just t-shirt sizes is often better than not. um, but these projects are impossible to estimate. I love, there's this one law called Hofstadter's law. This was like I guess you would consider him a mathematician, who wrote this incredible book called like Gödel, Escher, Bach, and it was just sort of like a mind expanding, bending book. But he talks about this law of Hofstadter's law, which is basically the time it will take will always expand beyond what you expect it will, even when you take Hofstadter's law into account. And his whole idea was around like self-referencing concepts, and this law is self-referencing because you're like, okay, it's going to take longer than I expect, and his law then says, nope, it's going to take longer than that, and you're like, okay, so it's going to take that long, no, it's going to take longer than that,
Yeah.
and it
Whatever
just
you
kind of
think,
keeps
just
on
double
growing.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's an interesting concept, right? Because I guess if you're coming in from the technical world, right, like you as a technical CEO here, you can appreciate when your team's like, we're not quite sure, especially when you even
Yeah.
fold bugs in, right? Like I like to tell people, I'm like, bugs is a Scrum Master's kryptonite, because some bugs you don't know. Like if you have somebody that doesn't really fully understand like the architecture of a system, um, it can just be super catastrophic, right? Like you
Mhm.
just don't know where the bug can even be in, right? And it's hard to like say, I need a deadline for this bug. Like I need to know
Yeah.
when you're going to fix this problem, so we know when to ship it, so we know what to communicate to the customers. And it's like you can't.
Yeah, you can't know until you open the darn thing up and look at it. And even then, you could get to the finish line and think you've resolved the bug. And then you go back and test it under a different scenario, and that you've got another day or week of work. And
Yeah,
that's the thing, is like you pull on the thread and you never know whether it's just like, pull out of a sweater, right? You never know whether you're going to pull a little tiny thread and boom, it's just a fuzz, it's gone. Or you pull and the whole
you,
sweater starts to unravel. And all of a sudden, you've got weeks or months of work to
I
resolve
was
the
gonna say
issue.
you just ended up with a little tank top.
Yeah. So,
The whole
yeah,
different
I
product
mean,
now. Yeah.
all of this, I
And
think, to say that, like, building things is really hard, unpredictable, and it it lends itself to having flexibility. Yeah,
right. Which is again why I think a tool like yours is so critical and important, right? As we come back to this concept of team alignment, because it's not always like the finish line, but rather how do we articulate the challenges and the successes that we're having day to day, as opposed to like, here's a plan, we're gonna stick to it no matter
right.
what.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could speak a little bit of how we do things internally. We we love to invent our own stuff. So if you've ever heard of objectives and key results, or
Yeah,
OKRs,
OKRs, yeah.
um, I I
Did you
have
make up the
struggled
KORs or something?
I have struggled so hard to find a way to adapt this concept to an early stage company with, not, I mean, it worked great for IBM, but I think the idea of saying, okay, it should work for a 12-person startup, there's some sort of gaps there. Rather than having individual goals or team goals, I rather just have company-wide goals that we are all working towards. And even, for example, marketing and product and engineering, everybody's working towards the same goals, and we try to set these goals at levels that everybody can contribute to. And then you set the metrics within them, in terms of what you think will help you've achieved them. And then underneath that, that's where the experimentation comes. Okay, if we want to move this metric that we believe is a way of telling us that we've achieved the overarching goal, here are some projects we can take on. And I think that's where sort of the agile aspect really comes into play, of experimentation and learning, and trying to make little bets. That is sort of where agile, and I think even some of the principles
Yeah.
behind Scrum really really excel.
But again, I think you're at a disadvantage being a technical CEO, right? Because you can appreciate these things, right? But oftentimes and I think this is like where we see this is where I see the demise of a lot of companies, right? My opinion is, if you put your CFO to be your CEO, like, you're just screwed. Like, you just put a nail on your coffin. And I
Yeah,
see that so much in like big companies like Boeing's and stuff like that, right?
you
Where
know
you're
what?
taking a very binary person and you're putting them into this aqua colored techno-color world.
We don't even need to hypothesize about what this would be like. You could just go look at Microsoft during the bomber years. Uh, I was an intern at Microsoft in 2011 as a sort of program manager, and I remember being in the audience of all the interns, and Steve Ballmer was there, and somebody asked Steve, "What is your favorite programming language?" And this is Microsoft, and Steve says,
VBA or
I don't
Excel.
I don't program.
They
I
don't-
don't know." And it was in that moment where I realized I don't want to work at this company. I mean, to have a leader who doesn't understand,
the
programming
product.
language, technology, even just look, you don't have to do it on a day-to-day basis, but at least to be fluent and understand how the sausage is made, I think builds so much understanding. And I mean, I tend to think of those years of Microsoft as a little bit of like the stagnant years, the lost years. And now we have, Satya Nadella at the helm, and we have, Azure has taken off. They've made some fantastic bets around AI. I think um, it's been a rebirth at Microsoft after that, and I think that was the perfect example of like taking the CFO, the bean counter, and putting them in charge.
Yeah. Every team that I've ever worked at, right? When you take a very big, like, I love that bean counter position, and you put them in a position to lead and innovate with an innovative team, it's impossible, because it's like it's just two different mindsets. Like,
Yep.
they just can't fathom like uncertainty, and it blows my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. I mean,
Gotta lean into it.
some of the most impactful things that we have built have come from the fact that as a technical CEO, I am very comfortable living in that world of like, let's just crack this problem open and see where we go. Like, just very open ended, and also being willing to invest. And here's the thing that I get really indignant on: being willing to invest more today in establishing capabilities that will help you tomorrow beyond just delivering what you have to deliver today, because that's it just opens up so many doors.
But fundamentally, there's a problem with that mindset, no? And that is, you still also have to be mindful that you do have a runway of cash.
That's
So
true. I get that.
how do you balance that?
It depends on whether the time frame within which you expect to achieve that benefit still falls within that sort of cycle, at least for us as a company, right? If we're building something today, I think our integration system is a very good example of this. Um, well, yeah, I'll even rewind the clock a little bit more. Before we were Visor, the company name was Rocket Visor. We were building a
Right.
Chrome
I've seen
extension.
that in some of the invoicing things that I've done with you.
Yeah, the company name is Rocket Visor, and we had a Salesforce integration. And when we built the Salesforce integration, we took extra time to build an integration system that would be able to work with other products. We did not just directly tie our product to Salesforce, even though at the time that was all we expected to integrate with. And when we decided to pivot to become Visor, it turned out that we were able to build a Jira integration in roughly a week and have it just fit in with everything else. And that effectively saved the company. We were able to pivot that quickly and have that agility because we had invested in that sort of plan. And so that just that reinforced the wisdom of taking an extra 10% of time, 20% of time to make those decisions while building that don't close doors, because when you're writing software, a lot of times you're either opening or closing doors, to future capabilities. And it's so hard and it's so important to get that right. That's why I really believe in having everyone in the team, even the engineers, knowing where we're going, not just today but in the longer term, so they could make those small decisions of, hey, I remember that talk that one day we might integrate with other products. So let me keep this door open so that if we ever integrate with another product, we don't just assume it's this one.
Yeah, and it's such a really good principle to live by, right? But like at some point though, you kind of grow too big, right? And I think we see that with Atlassian today, right? One of my biggest complaints with Atlassian today is like they have their principles, right? Their core values that they evangelize at the highest mountaintops, right? But my day-to-day interactions, not with all Atlassians, but with a certain amount of Atlassians, especially the newer ones,
Mm,
they tend to not be as evangelized into their own Kool-Aid.
mm,
Or they do things where I'm like, you might want to go take a look at your core values website. Cause
interesting.
like, like I'll give you a great example, right? One of my teams that I'm working with, we're an enterprise customer, uh, very, very expensive annual renewal.
Yeah.
And big businesses take a long time to pay for something,
Yeah.
right? Like if you asked me to pay for visors, it would take me 60 days, 90 days to get all the right approvals and talk to the right people and
Oh
get it
yeah.
all aligned. And so we got to the part where we had to do this renewal, and they're like, "You got to pay by Friday, or we're canceling your service." I'm like, "Come again? You're gonna what?"
Yeah, that's a hard deadline to set on a
But
large
it's a
company like
bold
that.
statement to make when your core values don't F your customer.
Yeah, that seems a little bit especially if it's a larger customer who's like been with you. It's a renewal, for God's sake,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it's like that kind of mentality. Like the example I'm trying to make is like it's really containable when you have like the again that small per company feeling. But as
Yep.
your company grows and scales, you have to be very proactive in instilling that principle and values as you grow and scale, because it's very easy 10,000 people later
Yeah,
for
to
one
lose.
person to forget and give everybody a really bad experience.
I find this to be such a fascinating problem or challenge in leadership, and I'm excited for the day where our company grows to that level and we have those types of problems. I think it's a really hard problem to solve, to have culture, because every like you double so frequently as an organization. That means 50% of the people, the majority of the people are no, we're 12. If we go to 24, we double. If we go beyond that, 48, we double. And every time you're doubling, you're introducing new people with new ideas of what the culture is. And even if you write them, people could walk by. I distinctly remember in the HubSpot office in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they have like walls with cultural values and quotes of the founders written down, and people could walk by it and just not get it and not understand it or not apply it. Um, it's Yeah, I wish I had an answer for it now. I haven't really been at that stage to have experimented with what works and what doesn't work, but
Yeah.
I know
What's
it comes from, I mean, if one of your values, maybe here's a way to break it down. If one of your values is, as you said, like don't F your customer, I think taking care of your employees is a great way to signal that, right? In some way, it kind of starts from the top.
Yeah, and you also have to be mindful of like as you're growing, right? You and I think Google is a great example of this, right? Like where when Google started off, like everybody was engineers, management were all engineers,
Yep.
everybody were engineers. It was an engineering led company, but engineers can't always do all the functions that a business needs to survive, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't know many legal engineers that are
Yeah.
lawyers and engineers, right? Like you start relying on like different disciplines that are just culturally just different folk, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's where you kind of start getting into, I don't want to say trouble, but where you gotta now really again be very proactive in making sure that everybody like still buys in and still cares about the company and the mission as much as you do. But
Yep.
I do think it starts at the top, right? Because like a lot of the I've worked in big, huge 100,000 person companies.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know the CEO. Right? I
Yeah.
don't even know the VPs.
Yeah. I don't know, that feels like such an opportunity at these larger companies to just go to where the employees are. I mean, I think one of the big issues at Boeing today is supposedly, and I'm not super keyed in on what's going on, but they moved management, was it to Chicago? And like,
Yep.
the factory is in Washington. How is that a smart idea? How is that?
Dude, the
that
the planes falling out of the sky. I have a theory. So I worked at that company for 6 years out of my life. And here's my theory.
yeah,
Hopefully, I don't get in trouble. But here's my theory. Right?
I won't tell anybody.
Yeah, I know, right? Hopefully, watch this be the one video that like goes viral, and like 100 million people see this. So here's my concept, right? So in 2005, uh, and I don't want to turn this into the Boeing thing, but I love this story and I like to share it, right? So in 2005, Boeing was looking for a new CEO. There was some scandals, some problems happening with previous leadership. They looked to get a new
Mm.
CEO. Alan Mulally, I don't know if you know him,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, huge. He used to run 737s and 777, right? The only two aircraft within the Boeing commercial air portfolio that are profitable aircrafts, or at least were, ran by that guy. And he was up for president to become CEO in 2005, but something happened, some scandal happened with the emails and CCing and stuff, and he was automatically disqualified. The way I've heard the story,
Yeah.
which I think was the biggest fail in Boeing history, to
Interesting.
not
Yeah,
put that one dude in charge because that
I
guy knew what's
vaguely
up.
remember this. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he goes over to Ford, and of course, Ford is the only one that didn't have to do the bailout, right? The
Yep.
best, and then he
Yep.
turned that whole thing around. But anyway, so in comes Boeing and brings in Jim McNerney from 3M, and he was Doctor Cost Cutting guy,
Yep.
right? And so Washington, I don't know if you know this, is a unionized state for engineering and manufacturing
I
labor.
did not know.
Everybody's unionized, even your white collar workers, right? And so cost cutting, let's go to Charleston, South Carolina, where there is no union and basically no employment rights.
Yeah.
And so you bring your new 737 MAX programs, your 787 programs, you build them over there, and then you threaten to fire everybody in Washington. So it goes beyond moving your HQ to Chicago, right? It goes
Yeah,
about
moving your manufacturing,
you move your manufacturing, and the people had
the
been, because Boeing
expertise.
is a generational company, right? The children of
Yes.
children of
Yes.
children
Yes.
worked on manufacturing line. And so all of a sudden you got somebody that's 27 years into a 30-year loan, and you're like, you move to Charleston or you're out of a job. Like it's a no-brainer. You just buy. Sorry, right?
Yeah.
And so now you have a whole new group of people, and then you outsource everything because that was McNerney's
Yeah,
huge thing, right?
all of that less the training over the years of how to do these things
Yeah,
that you
that whole
can't
MCAS
learn.
thing. Yeah, the whole MCAS thing. I guarantee you would have been caught in 30 seconds by somebody who had built that plane for
Mhm.
generations. But again, you save money in the short term,
Yeah, it catches up
and
to you.
catches up to you.
You gotta yeah, you gotta eventually pay that bill, and there's no free lunch, sometimes.
Ain't that the truth?
Um, but
Somebody's
yeah,
got to
I
put
think
that on
that
a shirt.
I think that's just a really important lesson to back to even where we started our conversation around, where it has to, the vision and the direction, if it's not solid from the top, can't really be effective going down through any set of tools or even any set of system that you have. There's no replacement for that understanding. So, the misunderstanding, or, I think we can probably comfortably say the misunderstanding of moving production to South Carolina, um, and losing out on all of those years and years of employees with deep knowledge of how to build an aircraft, which is you know generally not an easy thing. People don't just like pick that up. um that was a bit of a poor visibility, poor alignment
Yeah.
type problem.
I mean, it makes sense from a short-term financial gain. We're gonna save all this money,
Yeah.
but I don't think anybody thought that these planes would fall out of the sky one day.
you know i'm I'm the biggest. We were talking earlier also about geeks and nerds. One of the books I've loved reading in middle school was about Toyota, like the Toyota manufacturing system and Lexus. I was just obsessed. Well, I was a middle schooler. I had no business
Well,
to
yeah,
be.
what is a 13-year-old doing reading about manufacturing?
I don't know. I thought it was so interesting to me. And there are so many of these terms that like we just literally don't translate because we use the Japanese terms. Like one of my favorites is Genshi Genbutsu, which is a kind of came out of the Toyota manufacturing system, which basically means go and see. And that's one of the things that Toyota famously did, and I think they still do it, but at least back then it was a big feature of the book. Was executives would go to the manufacturing floor and just walk around and look at stuff, like literally go and see. Um, and it
Something
seems
Elon
like,
does quite a bit.
yeah. So I mean, I think their reputation for quality, when people are thinking of quality cars, I think generally Toyota comes to the top of the list, and frequently they rank highly in the JD Power initial quality assessments. If I mean, maybe correlation and does not necessarily require there to be causation, but seems like you don't have to take a big stretch to assume that having executives on the manufacturing floor will result in a better product.
But I think maybe extrapolating that a little bit, right? Because you're hitting on something that I passionately believe in, right? I mentioned Elon. A lot of people love or
Yeah.
hate Elon, right? But from a core principle, right? Like this guy understands his product,
Yes.
right? He whether he builds it or not, which obviously he doesn't, right? But he understands every step of every function of everything in there because he goes in there
Yep.
and does what he needs to do to fix the problems, which I think so many CEOs, right? I've been through so many companies in my career. I see so many CEOs like perched at the top. I'm like, what are you doing up there? Like,
Well, it becomes a
the
bubble
action's down here.
because you get your direct reports and then you stop engaging, at levels deeper
But
than
Elon's
that.
got direct reports too.
Well, I think he breaks out of that bubble and I mean, isn't he famously the one who would like, whatever the job was, he would just be like, "You know what? I don't like the way you're doing it. You're fired. I'm doing your job in the interim until I find a replacement."
Granted, there's a balance, right? There's a like a balance that you got to do, but I love that idea that like if you're the CEO of a company, like you really have to intimately know what's going on because
Yep.
that disconnect is contagious, right?
Yep.
And your direct reports are disconnected, and then they're disconnected, and at the end of the day, you got this one person doing the work who's updating these roadmaps, right? They're updating these Jira tickets, and without that traceability back up to the top, and somebody actually caring
Yeah.
about these things at the top as how they trickle down, right? Like it's really hard to have your skin in the game when
Yeah.
like nobody has skin in the game.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about Musk. I think he's a polarizing figure. I don't know where Steve Jobs' legacy sits today, but reading that biography and reading about him going and caring about the kerning of the spacing between the letters and the fonts and the Mac OS, like details that generally shouldn't matter. And I think if you were an investor today in a company and you had the CEO caring about those details, you might question it, but caring about those details, I think whether I mean maybe in his wisdom, maybe we're attributing too much intelligence to it, but it just sends a signal, right? Regardless of the kerning of the font in Mac OS, the signal that the CEO cares about the details, I think coming down or leadership, whether it's the CEO, whoever it is, leadership cares about the details, results in a product that is ultimately um,
Yeah.
built,
I
appreciated and built better.
I think another thing to really look at, right, and maybe this is something less with Musk, but maybe a little bit more with Jobs, right, and with Steve Jobs, and that is I see so many people they get a direction and they're scared, right? Like I'll have a director say, "Hey, I need this list." I'm like, "Do you know that this pulling this list is going to take me 3 days? Like, what do you want it with the list? Like, what are you trying to get? Maybe I can get it in 15 minutes or answer the question of like data that I intimately have
Right.
already." But so many people are just like, then they go and delegate it to another person and another person, but like
And by the time it gets
16
back
layers
up,
down,
yep.
you're like, what was the point of this? But I think a lot of leaders don't understand how critical every syllable that comes out of their
Oh,
mouth is.
you wanna talk about Silicon Valley, the TV show? One of my favorite scenes, do you remember The Bear is Sticky with Honey? That one?
Yeah.
Yeah, where, he's just getting in the for those who haven't watched it, the CEO of basically, Hooli, the company meant to be like Google, they're talking about some new product they're rolling out, and he goes and makes tea for himself, and he like grabs a honey bear, and nobody's paying attention to what he's doing, but he's making tea, and he's licking his hands. Oh, it's all sticky. He goes, he gets in the car, and as by the way, the bear is sticky with honey, and they don't know that he's talking about the honey bear, and they're like, what is he talking about with the bear
Yeah.
sticky with
It just
profound
cannonball
thing.
like this
Yeah, and then
whole
they my favorite is when he comes back later and there's like actually a bear. And they have to be like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. But yeah, like these statements can be taken out of proportion too, and that's maybe the risk of coming down
maybe,
too low.
maybe every founder should be watching Silicon Valley as a prerequisite to running a
It's
company.
definitely not. I mean, I guess laughing at yourself is kind of fun, but it's definitely it's hard to see so much, I'll call it verisimilitude, something that The Sopranos was really good at. But I have friends who were interviewed by the showrunners for Silicon Valley, who basically parody like the whole crypto bit of the the stuff with the blockchain and the new internet. Um, that's based on interviews of like real people in the community, and like they got it much closer than I think most people watching would even believe.
Yeah, no, it's I again, leadership is just such a powerful, interesting thing. I don't I hope one day to be in that kind of a position, kind of like what you're in your shoes, right? When you're like, hey, I wish I can have the 10,000 people problem because I want to solve those problems.
I want to solve this problem. I want to, try to make that better. I mean, that's been my whole I think that's been kind of like the whole story of my life, frankly, is I see things that I would like to make better, and I just like I'm going to give it a shot. And whether that was, I mean, this started in college and student government, where I was like a freshman and sophomore. I was like, I think the student government could run better. I ran for class, student body president, and my first year I didn't do as good of a job as I had liked because I was just kind of so naive. But like second term around, we got some good stuff done because of that, and it was fun. But like you gotta take your licks sometimes and make your mistakes and learn. But
And really reflect. I think a lot of people just, at least the newer generation, they just give up when things don't go their way, right? And it's like you
hmm,
really, I think to wrap this all together, right? Like you
yeah,
have to believe in it. You have to have skin in the
yep,
game. You have to have a passion for it. You And these all sound very cliche-ish, but you take a look at look at Nvidia today, right? Jensen being like the co-founder and being a technical CEO,
yeah.
right? Like you got to imagine that these hyper successful companies today, minus Apple, because freaking Apple is where they're at because of the $40 cable they charge you, not because of anything innovative.
It's all the dongles, right?
Not the dongle that they make you buy, right? There's nothing
Yeah,
innovative that
all
they're
the profit
popping
margin
out
they
over
need.
there. Yeah.
Um,
Minding that aside, right? Like, but even with Microsoft and Satya, right? Like, these are true product people that not only know their products, but also instill this vision of like, we care about this, right? And you should care about it too.
and
And
there's no successful company got to where they did without effectively almost dying at some point along the way. That is
right.
the that is the thing that, keeps me going when times are hard. And I really appreciate that I had this sort of perspective from reading some books about companies that we know. Every single company that consider today to be these runaway successes, overnight successes, it took 20 years to become an overnight success. uh it's
Have you
just
ever read The Hard Thing About Hard Things?
yep.
I
That's
read that book and I was telling my wife, I'm like, our life is easy. Like,
yeah,
there's no nothing. Like when you read that guy's story of the companies that they were, was it Netscape or something they were doing back then, right? Like those
yeah,
things were hard. Like
yeah.
their kissing of death was too close.
Yeah, yeah, but you know what? It's about, like, just literally not giving up. I mean, I'll tell, I guess, a personal story here, just connecting back to what we were saying about giving up, but, like, back to that student government example, this is, like, so many years ago, but I learned so much kind of from it, and it wasn't, like, intentional at the time. I wasn't nearly this wise, when it was happening. I was just kind of a little bit, maybe naive or stubborn, but I came onto campus, I ran for election for class president, I lost. I was like, all right, pick it up. Let me run again. I ran for Senate. I lost 2 in a row. You'd think this kid would, pack it up and be like, maybe this isn't for you. I took the lowliest job on the totem pole, the appointed IT chair job, the geek job to basically like, manage the tech systems. And, one of my biggest things was the free food list serve. So I went anywhere around campus, if there was free food, you would email, hey, we've got extra pizza after, this party, and people would love
Sounds
it.
like the best job in college.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I built a name for myself, and then I was able to become not just class president, but president of the whole school on the, third try was a charm. But like, if I had given up at any of those points along the way, if I had been, too sour to take the lowliest job on the totem pole where I was volunteering all of that time to, do this tech stuff, I would not have had the ability to try for that. And then it was just so rewarding to be able to, have that opportunity.
Yeah.
So I was just probably too naive and stubborn at the time to give up in a way, but I think that's
But it's an interesting perspective, and I know we're running out of time here, so just real quickly, I've been watching a show on Apple TV Plus called Acapulco, and there's a main character in the show that he's lost. He's just completely lost, and so he's trying to find his purpose. So he leaves, he comes back, he's in even hotter mess. He went through like a whole Steve Jobs enlightenment trip, right? And he comes back and he's trying to find his position, and so he literally did every single position in the resort that the movie's based out of.
wow.
Every job, every single job. And not to spoil it with anybody for anybody who's watching Acapulco, right?
Yeah.
But there comes a time where the show needs a leader, and he steps up naturally because he not only did he know how to do everybody's job because he tried them all,
Yeah.
but he knew the people because he worked with them
Yes.
on the floor, like elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder, working through the pain that they were going through. So when it
Mhm.
came time to like organizing and kind of commanding the troops, it was easy for him to say, "Hey, you do this, and don't worry if you think don't worry if you don't think you can do it because you can." And he had like personal stories and anecdotes for every person that he was commanding here, because
Mm.
again, he knew like from that experience, and I think that's something that again I wish a lot more leaders would be down there on the ground floor as
Yeah.
opposed to just saying like, "Hey, let's have a skip level meeting just to kick the
Yeah.
can a little bit."
Or in some of the companies you worked at, a skip, 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 skip level.
Yeah, skippity doo dah meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's again, just I just wish leadership so much more to go, and at least we have tools that can at least help
Yeah.
align it a little bit
It's
better.
so yeah, I mean, I guess, circling back to the beginning, the tools can multiply or effectuate whatever that vision is, but it can only be as strong as what that is and how organized you are. And that's where, uh, being a doctor, Dr. Jira, Dr. Team Alignment comes in as sort of like helping people sometimes help themselves of like clarifying what they actually mean. And that's why I think, well, I don't know. I know we joke about, AI taking all of our jobs. I saw some statistic that I think Gartner thinks that by 2030, 80% of project management tasks will be handled by AI. And I think that's directionally correct that it'll help us a little bit more, but clarifying ambiguity is something that is just so hard, and it's such a human trait. And I think that's why we'll all be pretty safe from losing our jobs to AI.
I think so too. I was initially very worried about AI, but we'll probably have to save it for a part two. But anyways, Michael, thank you so much for coming on here. Hopefully this was beneficial, at least an hour to just, talk about life and the theory of life.
Yeah, we
I
got
wish
deep.
you well. I wish you well. I can't let me know when you guys double and double again
I
from
will.
there.
I'll tell you when we get to 10,000
Yeah.
how we keep the culture.
Well, yeah, we'll go back and reference this video. So we'll keep this one
Yeah.
in the history books. Again, thank you, Michael, so much for being here and for being again a support of the channel and for taking time out of your very busy schedule today.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. It's a joy to be here.